Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhatia, and welcome to another episode TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us, once again after a long time, Alex Drag, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Gravitee. Alex, it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pumped to be here.
My pleasure to host you here. Tell us a bit about Gravitee. What do you folks do?
We are an API management platform. So the sort of nuts and bolts high level, you have a set of APIs or services that you want to expose to your API consumers or client-side applications. And you want to do that securely, reliably, with visibility. Use something called an API gateway as that proxy layer. And the API management functionality on top enables you to design, create, eventually expose, secure, make reliable your APIs, and put them eventually in a self-service catalog. So that's sort of the high level of what we do. I'm happy to chat more or double click on anything else you might find interesting there.
This week, you folks also launched Federated API management. Before we talk about that, I also want to talk about, is it wrong to say that we live in an API-driven world? So I want to, first of all, understand the role of API in modern world. And then we can talk about, because of this dependency on API, what kind of challenges it creates, which will create a segue to talk about the Federated. So let's start with API and its role.
Yeah, I mean, the role of APIs, gosh, I mean, it's so broad. I mean, the answer to your question, is it wrong to say that we're in an API-driven world? Absolutely not. So, I mean, it used to sort of be that APIs were treated as sort of architectural bricks, right? Well, integration bricks between system and system. And they are still used for that, for sure. But there's this growing movement towards treating APIs more as products and actually bundling a lot of your services functionality as APIs, whether those be for your internal developers to help them build faster, build easier, build more securely, so they don't have to worry about it themselves. They can just find the API they need, consume it, and then boom, their application is off to the races. But also for your customers and your partners, right? You have entire API companies whose their entire business model is built on exposing and productizing and publishing APIs. It's funny, I was just on a fireside chat with some of our customers, and they were talking about how internally they're trying to really implement this shift from API sort of integration brick piece to the API as a product with its own life cycle. You have to be able to manage that API across every stage of the life cycle, all the way from ideating as far as what do you need to build the API, what sort of functionality or data do you need to expose, all the way to security, to exposure, to monitoring, to eventually deprecation, right? When it's time to replace that with some other service, right? So we really are shifting towards this view of API productizations and APIs as products themselves. Now, you asked what challenges has sort of the explosion of APIs resulted in. Well, APIs are responsible for a lot of things in the organization. Naturally, there's going to be security implications of that, right? So especially when you're talking about APIs that might expose sensitive data or a set of sensitive functionality, right? And let's say that you have one API, it's like, okay, well, you can keep track of that. But now when you're ballooning to thousands of APIs, and some of them are sensitive, some of them are not, you clearly have a security problem on your hands. I forget what the actual percentage is, but it's something pretty crazy about the amount of security incidents that are actually API related, right? And that I think web APIs, are like the number one, or at least like a top 3 security threat or a vector for bad actors on the internet. So there are serious security challenges there, keeping track of the APIs you have in production, making sure that all of the authorization is implemented properly. So that's modern protocols, making sure that it's implemented consistently across your entire API ecosystem. And that's just security. The other side is also, there's a big discoverability challenge. And this is where we really get into some of the federated API management stuff that you mentioned earlier. So if you have thousands of APIs across the org, so you have a bunch of developers that you're hoping can find, discover, understand those APIs, subscribe to them, and then eventually have their applications consume them. Well, how do you make sure that those devs even know they exist? And how do you sort of how can those developers find the signal amongst the noise, right? Thousands of APIs is a lot of noise. How can they find the exact one they need and know how to use it and subscribe to it in a self-service manner? Just like you think, if we get back to this API productization methodology, you want self-service products, right? And that's how we're starting to treat APIs. And that's difficult, right? Actually being able to have someone who's responsible for creating that initial API, to typically passing it off to another team that has to ensure that that thing is secured properly and then published in a self-service manner. It's also easily understandable by the API consumer. And of course, who's monitoring it to make sure that consumption is reliable, secure, et cetera, et cetera. There's all sorts of complications and risks that are introduced. And the last one that I'd probably speak to is this problem, what we call API sprawl, right, or gateway sprawl. So API gateways and API management solutions are sort of the core of an organization's API management strategy. The reality is if you're a large org, which are a lot of the organizations that we speak with and work with, you've probably got multiple different API gateways and management solutions running around the organization, right? And how do you govern that entire full lifecycle API management strategy and process when using these different tools, each with their different approaches, each with different levels of support for certain APIs, event streams, protocols, et cetera, right? And that is a really tough one. And that is actually what we've introduced Federated API Management as a solution to that, right? And I'm happy to discuss that a bit more throughout the rest of this conversation.
As you talk about the challenges that are associated with this whole API sprawl, how is Gravitee going to address this challenge to this newly announced Federated API Management solution?
Basically, if you think API management as a practice has historically been sort of inextricably tied to the gateway, right? So you'll hear this acronym FLAPM, or full lifecycle API management. So solutions for designing, for exposing, securing, making reliable, monitoring, publishing, all this stuff, right? All the major API management solutions have kind of built their full lifecycle stack of solutions, but they're all tied to using, or typically at least all tied to using that specific vendor's gateway. Gravitee is abstracting away much of API governance, which is a key component of the full lifecycle, from the gateway itself, and the publication to something like a dev portal from the gateway itself. So you can still use Gravitee for exposure. There's lots of reasons to do it, especially if you're an organization that wants to expose event streams as APIs. But let's say that you're an organization that's using Gravitee for some Kafka exposure use case. We've also got something like AWS API Gateway or Apigee API Gateway, some more legacy API management solution that you've picked up over time. We see it all the time. There's just multiple teams in the org that kind of act as their own buying cycles or buying centers, and they have their own solutions in-house. What Gravity's doing is basically, what we've already done, we've already pushed, like you said, recently announced, is this, what I call a universal sort of governance layer, right? And a universal publication layer. The governance layer is a single pane of glass for discovering, keeping inventory of, designing subscription control mechanisms for APIs across these third-party gateways. So you can literally have some dev somewhere in the organization create an API via AWS API Gateway, deploy it to AWS API Gateway. Gravity is going to automatically discover that. So you're going to be able to see all your APIs across these various gateways in the Gravitee governance and the management console and the sort of governance layer. You can create a subscription plan, and a lot of the magic is then publishing it to a universal developer portal. So it's one access layer that can span all of your various API gateways in your organization so that your API consumers can go to one place to find them, right? And that is very rare. I was actually talking with the team just a few weeks ago. I think they have a specific API management solution, and that solution basically requires you to have one developer portal, one API catalog per gateway instance. So they've got dozens of gateway instances, and now dozens of catalogs these APIs exist. You can imagine how hard that is for the app dev or something as an API consumer to find the actual API they need to start building, right? I think what they've said is that basically they're spending 30 days right now between when that initial API is created to credentials actually being given to the API consumer so that they can start consuming that API, right? And they think that Federation, what we've pushed, is going to reduce that time from 30 days to 1 day, right? Because now it's automatic discovery of the API being created, pushing it to the dev portal day one, and then boom, your consumer can find it because they know exactly where it is, right? Know exactly where to go.
I also want to go a bit in detail how the inner workings of that. But before we go there, I also want to understand that how mature, how big, what is the state of API management market?
The API management market, I mean, it's big. I wouldn't say it's fully matured by any means, but there are plenty of solutions out there. And I, to be completely honest with you, I don't think there is a single solution, right, that covers every single use case the best. Like that's not how any of these markets work, right? And if a vendor ever tells you that, you should run for the hills. They're lying to you, right? There are certain solutions out there that do X really well, and then some that do Y really well, and some that do Z really well, right? I mean, whether you're looking at folks, I mean, all the major cloud providers have API gateway solutions. So AWS has their own. I've already mentioned them a little bit as it pertains to our federated solution. Azure has an API gateway. Apigee used to be a standalone and then acquired by Google. So now that's the GCP API gateway and management solution, right? But there's still other folks out there like Kong or Tyke, and there's a bunch of other smaller API management projects that have popped up over the last few years. And I would say that each of them are sort of addressing specific sets of challenges. Now, where I would say Gravitee has an interesting advantage, if that's the right word, is the ability to empower all of these other teams across the org to use whatever gateway they want, right? Like, I mean, if your use case calls for AWS, great. We're not going to say you have to come use Gravity's gateway, right? We're going to make your experience with those solutions better, right? Once again, it is a single pane of glass that's going to enable governance across a heterogeneous API gateway and management ecosystem, right? So we really see the strengths of our competitors, like, great. Like they'll help our customers solve their problems, and we will help our customers solve problems that they might have because they want to use us for some stuff and those competitors for others, right? So for us, it's all about empowering teams to use whatever solution they want. And sort of the motto for us is, any API, any gateway, any broker, doesn't matter. It's all governable with Gravity. So there's no concern there. We want our customers to be successful. They should use whatever solution they need to make that happen.
Now, can we go in detail that how is it possible for Gravity to have this kind of visibility? You mentioned, event brokers, whether it's Amazon API Gateway or Google's APG, now part of GCP.
I can't go into too much of the engineering magic, right? Because there is some secret stuff under the hood, right? But we have, put it this way, we have certain infrastructural components, right, that will enable us to basically sit and listen for a new API being created, right, in those specific solutions. And it's not just actually seeing the API. We can see the usage plan that you've created. So let's go back to AWS. Let's say that you've created an AWS API Gateway API with an API key authorization usage restriction or plan. Well, we can see that too. And if you create specifications or documentation in AWS, we can see that too. We can import all that automatically into Gravity and create a sort of Gravity API asset that mirrors all of that, right? And then, of course, we can publish that to that dev portal. Because once you have an API in Gravity, that's dev portal ready. And very clear, it doesn't require the gateway, which is really cool. We just go directly into this sort of management and governance layer and into the dev portal. So there's no extra proxy, no extra hop at all, right? But I think the core of it really is that automatic discovery and import, right? Functionality that we've implemented with Federated API management.
We often hear this term, single pane of glass. Companies talk about that. If you look at, the observability space or the whole API management space, how much of this is just hype or how much of this is actual reality? Because in the end, the complexity is growing. We all know that, and we have to reduce these complexities. So when it comes to API, is it really possible to kind of have a single source of truth for APIs and their management?
I certainly think so. And I can get on a call with anybody and prove it. I can show it to them in real time with the product, right? It exists today. I mean, you can go to the website and see it. I think historically it has been a lot of hype, right? And someone could claim that, but in order to actually have that single pane of glass historically, well, you got to have a single gateway and management solution, right? And that is a solution some organizations will take, I should be clear. And it makes sense from time to time, right? But our philosophy is that no matter if you're a bring your own gateway shop or we want to consolidate on a single API management and gateway solution, you shouldn't suffer as it pertains to having a single pane of glass, right? That optionality exists for you no matter what sort of gateway strategy you want to implement in your organization. So yes, I absolutely think it's possible, all the way from keeping inventory of all your APIs to actually seeing analytics on consumption and setting up things like monitoring and alerting and proper observability for your APIs. Like all of that is not possible if you actually implement this federated, what I call multi-gateway, multi-broker API management strategy.
Has the definition of API management changed? Is the modern definition different? How does Gravity look at this?
Well, I'm sort of thinking in terms of where does API management need to go, right? It changes oftentimes. We have our own opinions on what modern API management looks like, right? And we sort of see this as there's three pillars to it. One is this multi-gateway, multi-broker support, right? This federation aspect, the ability to abstract API management away from these specific gateways or event brokers that your organization is choosing. The second, event native, the ability to treat event APIs and event streams as first-class citizens within your larger API management strategy. And the third is AI forward. So there's two components to this for me. One is, yes, everyone's going to have some sort of AI powered functionality in their gateway solution. Some will be legitimate, some won't. That's SaaS for you, right? That's DevTools. Everyone's got AI powered something. The more interesting thing to me is, how are we actually going to be able to use API management to help organizations better leverage AI in their organization, right? Whether that's controlling costs or ensuring that LLM access is secure or whatever it might be. I don't actually think we know what that's going to look like going forward. But the API has historically, at least for a while now, been the thing that sort of brokers access to certain resources that people want. I see no reason why that wouldn't apply to AI as well. And API management is going to play a major role there. Right, so those are the three things that I really think will define where API management is going really starting now and into the future.
Of course, we are talking about this announcement that you folks make this week. There are a lot of things you cannot talk about. We'll talk about them when they're ready, but just give us a glimpse, a teaser, what else to expect from Gravitee this year.
I mean, I think we're going to continue to expand our federation support, right? I mean, what I want to see is service agnostic API management at some point, right? I don't know when that comes, but that's what I want to see. I don't care what service you want to expose to your clients, your consumers. API management has all the bells and whistles to make that secure, reliable, and make that happen, right? So to me, that's what I want to see. I think I can probably leave it at that.
Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. Talk about Gravitee, talk about modern API management. Thanks for great insights, and I look forward to chat with you again. But let's make sure that we will not see each other in 4 years. We should make it more frequent. Thank you.
I'm definitely game, man. Let's make it happen. Thanks so much.